what's up, and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be talking about William Desmond Taylor, or as he's known from birth, William Cunningham Dean Tanner. So, I bet you're wondering what happened. Well, just stay tuned to find out. Hey guys, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be talking about the death of William Desmond Taylor, which was something that nobody really expected. Now, he was a silent film director. He directed 59 films between 1914 and 1922, and he was also an actor as well. Now, he acted in about 27 films between 1913 and 1915, but he was really known for his directing. And nobody really expected him to be murdered. Well, so who was he? He was born William Cunningham Dean Tanner on the 26th of April of 1872 at Evington House in Carlow, Ireland. He was one of 5 children to Major Thomas Kearns Dean Tanner, who was a retired British Army officer, and his wife, Jane O'Brien. Now, one of his uncles actually was a part of Irish Parliament Party, and his name is Charles Kearns Dean Tanner. So from 1885 to 1887, this is when William would attend Marlborough College in England. In 1891, this is when he would go to a dude ranch in Kansas. So it's his first time in the United States, and this is where he experiences acting again. Now, the first time was when he was in school back in Ireland and in England, but he started experiencing again, and then this is what made him move to New York City. So while he was living in New York, this is when he dates a woman named Ethel May Hamilton. Now, she's an actress that actually goes by the name Ethel May Harrison. Now, she is known for the musical Florodora. Her father was a broker and an investor for antique stores on Fifth Avenue, which if you don't know Fifth Avenue in New York City, woo girl, it's like Rodeo Drive. Is popular. And eventually, William would become employed at the antique store that Ethel's father invested in. Now, they went on to be married on the 7th of December of 1901 at the little church around the corner, and they went on to have a daughter named Ethel Daisy, who was born in either 1902 or 1903. It's not really specified. Now, he was very well known in New York City and in the society, and his family was known as well. They were members of several different clubs, but his liking of alcohol turned him into a heavy drinker, and it's possible that he suffered from depression. He was also known to have many affairs with different women, and on the 23rd of October of 1908, this is when he leaves his wife. He abandons them. And after he disappears, his friends say that he suffered a memory or mental lapse, and they just simply thought that he wandered off during an amnesia episode. Now, Ethel would obtain a divorce decree in 1912 on the basis of desertion. So we don't really know what happened to him when he disappeared, except for the fact that he traveled through the northwestern United States and Canada. Specifically, he went to Alaska, and this is where he mined gold and was in various different acting troupes. So he just restarted his life. He was like, nah fam, I'm good. Peace. And basically restarted his life on his own. It kind of sucks for Ethel, you know, mom and daughter, but so he ultimately would switch from being in front of the camera to being behind the camera. He really enjoyed directing. Now, he was arrested in San Francisco, and because of this, he ended up changing his name to William Desmond Taylor. Now, this was in 1912, the same year that Ethel obtained a divorce decree. So, this is when he's in San Francisco. He met with some people he knew from New York, and basically they lent him money so that he could find a place and start a new life in Los Angeles. So he really leaned on his friends at this time to support him in a way that he didn't have support from others. So his first time really acting in film was in 1913 with New York Motion Picture Company. His earliest screen appearance was in the movie The Counterfeiter, and he went on to act for Vitagraph Studios, in which he had 4 different roles starring opposite Margaret Gibson. Now, he also worked for the Balboa Amusement Producing Company during this time as well. So while he was with them, he met Neva Gerber. He would be engaged with until 1919, and she would say later that he was a man of honor of personal culture, education, and refinement, and that she never knew a better man. So he then began to direct films in 1914 with the movie The Judge's Wife, which was one he wrote for Balboa Amusement Producing Company. And after he left Balboa, he then went on to working for the American Film Manufacturing Company, and this is where he directed the film series The Diamond in the Sky. He would then go on to join Palace Pictures he went on to join Palace Pictures in October of 1915. Now, Palace Pictures would then become a subsidiary of the famous Players Lasky. And so basically with this is when he's still directing. He worked for 1 month with Fox Film in 1917, but all the other things he directed were all for the famous Players Lasky or its subsidiary companies. So, and around 1915, he made contact with his sister-in-law, Ada Brennan Dean Tanner, which is the wife of his youngest brother, Dennis. And Dennis is a former Army lieutenant. And he also manages a New York antiques business, which is separate from Ethel's father's. So Dennis also had abandoned his wife and children and disappeared in 1912. So Ada and her daughters moved to Monrovia, California, and this is where Ada could be treated at the Pottinger's Sanatorium for tuberculosis. Now, Ada's sister Lillian Pomeroy was married to the sanatorium's physician in charge, John L. Pomeroy, and this would become public after William Desmond Taylor's murder, and the press really went into Monrovia. So it's towards the end of World War I in 1918 when he then enlists in the Canadian Expeditionary Force as a private, and he trains for about 4.5 months in Fort Edward, Nova Scotia. He then sailed from Halifax with 500 other soldiers, and they arrived at the Hounslow Barracks in London on the 2nd of December of 1918. So he was then ultimately assigned to the Royal Army Service Corps in the Expeditionary Forces Canteen Service, which is stationed in Dunkirk. Dunkirk is in northern France, which is about 6.2 miles from the Belgian border, and it has the third largest French harbor. He was then promoted to the temporary grade of lieutenant on 15th of January of 1919. And at the end of April of 1919, he reached his final billet in Bergues, France, as Major Taylor and Company D of the Royal Fusiliers. So when he arrived back in LA on 14th of May of 1919, he was then honored by the Motion Pictures Directors Association with a formal banquet at the LA Athletic Club, which was very nice of them to do because he's a fellow actor and director, now has gone to war and has come back. So after his military service, he went on to direct more, and he worked with some very popular stars at the time. Mary Pickford, who I mentioned in The Death of Olive Thomas, Wallace Reid, Dustin Farnham, and his protege, Mary Miles Minter, who starred in Anne of Green Gables in 1919. So by this time, this is when his ex-wife Ethel and his daughter Ethel were aware he was working in Hollywood. And it's in 1918, while they were watching the film Captain Alvarez, they saw him on screen. Ethel then said, "That's your father," and in response, her daughter Ethel wrote William Desmond Taylor. And in 1921, this is when he visits his ex-wife and his daughter in New York City, and he made Ethel his legal heir. So if he died, everything would go to her. So let's talk about some meta, shall we? Shall we? Because it gets a little funky. It's gonna get funky. So at 7:30 a.m. on the morning of the 2nd of February of 1922, his body was found inside of his bungalow, which is at the Alvarado Court Apartments, specifically 404B, South Alvarado Street. Now this is in Westlake, LA, which this neighborhood is very trendy and very upcoming. He was discovered at 7:30, and there was a crowd that gathered around inside, and someone identified himself as being a doctor, then made the examination of Taylor. It said that he died of a stomach hemorrhage. This doctor was never seen again, and when doubts arose, we would finally, figure out what happened. So, at 8 a.m., the police arrived. He was found with a pool of blood around him. Well, at 8:40, this is when the coroner arrives, And when they decide to move his body, this is when they discover the pool was coming from his back. The pool of blood was coming from underneath him. And this is when they discover a gunshot wound. Basically, they think that he was shot with a small caliber pistol, and the pistol was not found at the scene. Well, here's the funky thing. Here's the funkiness about it. Actually, let's get into that in a second. His funeral would take place on the 7th of February of 1922 at St. Paul's Cathedral. He would then be interred in a mausoleum at Hollywood Cemetery, which is now called Hollywood Forever Cemetery on Santa Monica Boulevard. And the inscription reads, "In memory of William C. Dean Tanner, beloved father of Ethel Dean Tanner, died the 1st of February of 1922, which is very sweet. Robbery was ruled out because they found him having $78 in cash, which is the equivalent of $1,200 now, a cigarette case, a Waltham pocket watch, a penknife. There was a locket that had a photograph of Mabel Normand, which kind of correlates back to the Olive Thomas case. There was also a 2-carat diamond ring on his finger as well that was found. So there was no motive for robbery and no motive for this killing that they had found. They believe, however, that there was a large and undetermined sum of money that William Desmond Taylor had shown his accountant the day before his murder that was missing, and it was never accounted for. And after some investigation, the time of his death was put at 7:50 p.m. on the evening of the 1st of February of 1922. Well, interviews began 5 days later after he was found. So Minter said that following the murder, her friend and director, Marshall Nealon, had told her that Taylor had made highly delusional statements about some of his social acquaintances weeks before his death. She also said that Nealon thought that Bill had recently become insane too. This whole thing became a media circus and a frenzy, like legit media circus and frenzy. And it just, like, whole thing was nuts. So there's some things about this case that's a little more funky. So now they believe that it's 7:50 when he dies. At around 8 p.m. the night before, this is when his neighbor, Douglas McLean, and his wife Faith were having dinner, and they hear what sounds to be like a gunshot. And around the same time, this is when the apartment manager, E.C. Jesserin, also hears the noise, but he simply doesn't think anything of it, which is kind of fishy, right? Well, here's the other thing. The police weren't the first people in that apartment. So when he was first discovered, somebody tipped off Charles Ayton. Now, Charles Ayton was a notable and prominent figure in film. He went to the crime scene, and it's believed that he removed evidence that could have potentially implicated him in the studios and William Desmond Taylor and other people. And it said that he planted evidence to hide the fact that possibly William Desmond Taylor was a homosexual. And back then, at this time, bigwigs at studios were like God. If you wanted to play with fire, you would screw with them. But if you didn't want to, you would get on their good side and do whatever the fuck they wanted you to do. They were janky. And they did whatever they wanted to without any repercussions, and this was one of them. So, like I said, Mabel Normand was a prominent person in this case and in other cases that we have kind of discussed. She was the last person to see him alive. Now, she was also in that locket. So, possibly something could have been going on between them. She was last seen at around 8 p.m. or a little before 8 p.m., getting in her car, and then her driver drove her home. But they're not the only ones that are suspects and witnesses. So it's also believed, too, that one of the investigators, Edward King, believed that there was a nightgown that was found at the crime scene, and it was pink and silky. He believed that the nightgown belonged to a woman. Now, they think that this was planted by Charles Ayton as evidence that could have been found, as there was men in the apartment. So another reason to kind of like facilitate a cover for if William Desmond Taylor was homosexual. Edward Sands is somebody of interest, and okay, here's the thing. While William Desmond Taylor was in Europe this summer before 1921, Edward Sand forged William Desmond Taylor's names on checks and wrecked his car. He then later burgled Taylor's bungalow, and he left footprints on his bed. And following the murder, this is when Edward Sands was never seen or heard from again. So it's kind of weird. Henry Peavy is another one that is a suspect. He was the person that actually found Taylor's body. And the newspapers noted that he wore flashy golf costumes, but didn't own any golf clubs. And about 3 days before the murder, this is when Henry was arrested for social vagrancy and being charged with lewd and dissolute conduct. Interesting, right? So Henry went on to dying in an asylum in San Francisco where he was hospitalized for syphilis-related dementia in 1931. Mabel Normand. Now, obviously, she was the last person to see him alive before he died. Well, according to Robert Giroux, they believe that William Desmond Taylor was madly in love with Mabel Normand, who originally had approached him to help her to solve her cocaine dependency. Now, it's based on her statements to police that she repeated relapses, and it was devastating for Taylor. Now, apparently, Taylor met with federal prosecutors shortly before his death in order to testify against Mabel Normand's suppliers for cocaine. And he believes that these suppliers learned of the meeting and hired a contract killer to assassinate William Desmond Taylor. Now, according to Robert as well, he suspects that Mabel suspected the reasons for her lover's murder as well, but did not know who the person was that pulled the trigger. Now, on the night of the murder, she claims she left at 7:45 in a happy mood, and she was carrying a book that he lent her. She then blew kisses to him, and then she got into her limo and drove away. Now, she was the last person to see him alive, and the LAPD it was a grueling interrogation with her, but she was ruled out, which most other people, it was the same. They were all ruled out. However, her career had slowed, and her reputation was tarnished because of her addiction, which was seen as her morale failing. Now, according to George Hopkins, who sat next to her at Taylor's funeral, she was inconsolable during the ceremony. She could not stop crying. She continued to make films during the 1920s, but unfortunately she died of tuberculosis about 8 years later on the 23rd of February of 1930. And according to her friend, Julia Brew, a few days before she died, she said to her, "Julia, do you think they'll ever find out who killed Bill Taylor?" Which he went by Bill. That was the question. Who killed him? Who killed Bill? Faith Cole McLean, which is the wife of Douglas McLean, is another suspect. Now, they were startled by the sound at 8 p.m., which sounded like a gunshot. She opened her front door and saw somebody coming from the front door of Taylor's home who was dressed like what you would see from a person trying to burgle a house. She also recalled that this person paused for a moment before turning back through the door, as if they forgot something, and seconds later flashed a smile at her after they reemerged and then disappeared between the buildings. How fucking creepy is that? She said that she thought the loud noise she heard was like a car backfire or a gunshot, and she told the police that he looked funny, like movie actors in white-faced makeup, and speculated that it may have been a woman disguised as a man, but she didn't really know. Mary Minter was a former child actor, and her career was guided by Bill Taylor. She grew up without a father, was only 3 years older than Bill's daughter. Now, there was love letters between Mary Minter and Bill Taylor found at his bungalow, and based upon these, they think that there was a sexual relationship going on between them, which they believe started when she was about 17. Now, Bill Taylor was 49 when he died, and she was only 19. So, there's some, So, there are people that dispute this allegation, but her own statements say that she believed that her love for Bill was unrequited, and Bill often declined to see her and described himself as being too old for her, so he was trying to stop what could have happened. Unfortunately, parts of her letters to him were printed in newspapers, and it forever shattered her image as a modest and wholesome girl. And she was screwed by the press. She was screwed over. She made only 4 more films for Paramount Pictures, and then the studio did not renew her contract. She received offers from other producers, but she declined them all, and she was never really comfortable as an actress. She then went on to marry Brandon O. Hildebrandt, who was a Danish-American businessman. She then went on to have a normal life, and she died in 1984. Charlotte Shelby, who was the mother of Mary, like many other stage mothers, she's described as being manipulative, and she's consumed with the greed of her child's career. Mary and her mom were like bitterly divided by finances and lawsuits, but they would later reconcile. Now, Charlotte's initial statements to police about Bill's murder are very still categorized and characterized as being severely evasive and obviously filled with lies about both her daughter's relationship with Bill and other things that they covered. So it's perhaps the most telling bit of circumstantial evidence that Charlotte allegedly owned a rare .38 caliber with some unusual bullets, which were very similar to the kind that killed Taylor. It's fishy, huh? And after this information became public, she then threw the pistol into a bayou in Louisiana. Not something Mommy dear should do, huh? Very, very interesting, huh? So, she knew that the LA District Attorney spent years outside the United States in an effort to avoid both official inquiries and by his successor in press coverage when it came to this murder, because he did not want to answer any questions. Now, in 1938, her other daughter, Margaret Shelby, who by then was suffering from clinical depression and alcoholism, openly accused her mother of the murder of Bill Taylor. She was widely suspected for the crime and was the favorite suspect from many people. So, Adela Rogers St. John's also speculated that Charlotte was torn with the feelings of her protection of her daughter when it came to her own attraction to Bill Taylor. So apparently she was super attracted to Bill, but so was her daughter, and she wanted to save her daughter from this. Yeah. So Charlotte feared she would be tried for murder. And at least 2 LA County District Attorneys publicly denied prosecuting her. So that was good that they did that. But after about 20 years after the murder, they concluded that evidence was insufficient to indict her and recommended that the remaining evidence and case files be retained on a permanent basis. So all of these actually have all disappeared. None of them are in any of the vaults. All of it has disappeared. So something is fishy when it comes to his murder. Absolutely fishy. Charlotte would die in 1957. She was in ill health, but she ended up committing suicide. Interesting, right? So Margaret Gibson is another person that is So she was a film actress that worked for Bill Taylor when she first came to Hollywood. And in 1917, she was indicted and tried and acquitted on charges equivalent to prostitution and also opium dealing at the time. And after she changed her professional name to Patricia Palmer, and this is why, because she was arrested. So in 1923, she was arrested and she was sent to jail for extortion, which was later dropped. When she was about 27 years old, this is when Bill Taylor died. So there's no record of her name being ever mentioned in connection to this investigation, but soon after is when she started working on a number of films produced by Famous Players Lasky, which is the studio that Bill Taylor worked for. And especially at the time of his murder. Now, she died shortly before 1964, and she apparently confessed to murdering him. But we'll never know with her as well. So, because the time when he died was horrible when it came to crime scenes, a lot of people trampled over it. There was corruption. A lot of the physical evidence was lost, and the rest of it just vanished over the years because they don't care about their shit, and they just don't keep a good record of these things. Although there's a few documents from the police files that were made public in 2007, a lot of it is gone. There's various theories that are put together of the murder in the years that follow. A lot of books have been published because of this, and a lot of them claim to have identified the murderer, but there's no conclusive evidence that's ever been uncovered that link the crime to any particular individual. So here's what I think. So, and what I've kind of read too is that the police believe that he was shot from behind. So this means that whoever shot him, he didn't know that they were there. And they believe that he was shot in the back while he was being hugged. So there's an entrance wound in his back from the GSW, and it would exit through his front. Well, the way like he was shot in kind of his arms, it showed that his arms were kind of like up. You know what I mean? It was something was off about it. That and also with how Charles Ayton was the first person to be on the scene and he also tampered with evidence, something is not right here. So it seems to me that I believe William Desmond Taylor, with the connection to Mabel Normand's cocaine affiliates, this gives probable means for the reason why he died. Now, I'm highly speculating when it comes to this because there's no records of any of this. But this case is super fishy, and something's just not right about the whole thing. All the people involved, all of like the bigwigs in production that are involved, something doesn't add up here. Like, and why did it take you so long to call the police? If you discover his body at 7:30 in the morning, like, wouldn't you immediately call the police? No, you call an executive for a production company. Strange. But what are your thoughts? Put them in the comments down below. Who do you think is responsible for the death of William Desmond Taylor? I'd like to hear your thoughts, comments, concerned, all of the above. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys tomorrow in a brand new video. Bye, guys.